Hi folks, welcome to the 12th instalment in the hunt for Moffett ancestors, and this time we are focusing on the McMurrays, who we know are in some way related to the Moffetts. The problem with searches for the McMurrays is that not only do we have to cope with possible transcription errors, but there are the inevitable variations such as McMurray, McMurray, and sometimes just Murray, where the MC is interpreted as a middle initial M or just missed out completely. So things are never easy. Back in the 10th video, we suggested that Margaret Moffett and Jane Hullen were sisters when we find them in the home of Thomas and Jane McMurray in 1861. This would mean that Margaret was also the niece of Thomas and Jane. Since Margaret's son John Moffett is recorded as being their nephew in 1871, this would suggest that maybe he is really their great-nephew, given that the age difference is about 51 years. We also know that Thomas McMurray was a widower in the 1881 census, which would imply that Jane died sometime between 1871 and 1881. Although born in Hull, once he had moved, Thomas would appear to have spent all his life in Carlisle, which is where Jane was born, but a search of the GRO index for the death of a Jane McMurray in Carlisle draws a blank. However, the death of a Jane McMurray is recorded in Jarrow, and this death certificate reveals that she died of typhoid fever at the age of 69 on the 21st of July 1879 at 22 Shakespeare Street. This is the home of George and Margaret Moffett. She is the wife of a Thomas McMurray, who is recorded as an iron shipyard labourer rather than a cotton warper. Also, the informant is recorded as Mary Moffett, her niece. So, apart from Thomas's occupation, all the other evidence would appear to confirm that Margaret is the sister of Jane Hullen. And as Jane H is the niece of Jane M, daughter Mary will be Jane M's great niece. And this would also confirm that the relationship is on Margaret's side of the family rather than George's, as it is Margaret's sister who is the niece. So, the question is Jane McMurray the sister of Mary Houlihan, née Armstrong, or the sister of Hugh Houlihan? The 1861 census tells us that Jane McMurray was born in Carlisle, as is Mary, Margaret's mother. We know that Hugh was born in Ireland, while Thomas McMurray was born in Hull. Given that both Mary and Jane were born in Carlisle, this would strengthen the case that Jane is most likely the sister of Mary. Jane McMurray's age in the 1861 census would suggest she was born around 1811, although the death certificate would suggest that this was more accurately 1810. Mary was 43 in 1841, so was probably born around 1808, so Mary would be 2 or 3 years older than Jane. So the task is now to confirm that Jane is the blood relative of Mary Houlihan, or as she was, Mary Armstrong, and the key to this is to discover Jane's surname. And the most obvious thing would be to find a marriage record. Unfortunately, there is no online record of a marriage of a Thomas McMurray to a Jane in Carlisle during the 1830s and before 1851, when Thomas was living with Jane in Stedome Lane, Carlisle. So to attempt to resolve this puzzle, we need to delve further into the McMurray family. Thomas McMurray is not found in the 1891 census, so we can assume that he died after 1881, but before 1891. Search of the GRO index reveals that he died on the 21st of September 1890 at the age of 78, so born around 1812, and he died in St Joseph's Home, Albert Street, Carlisle, and his home is recorded as being on Milbourne Street. The informant was his brother, Patrick McMurray of Bridge Street. The other documents that might have recorded Jane's surname would have been birth certificates, but there is no record of any children of Thomas and Jane McMurray in any of the censuses. Consequently, it is instructive to look at his brother, Patrick, as he is someone who is very much easier to trace through the various censuses. We find him in the 1891 census, aged 82, living at 45 Bridge Street as a retired warper with his granddaughter Frances, who's aged 29, and his great-grandson Thomas W., who's 10 months. Frances was born in Manchester, while Thomas was born in Carlisle. Patrick is a widower, while Frances is single rather than married. In the 1881 census, Patrick is aged 72, living at Old Anchor Inn, 45 Bridge Street, Carlisle, with his son David, 32 and unmarried, and his granddaughter Frances, aged 19. Patrick is a clerk, as is his son, while Frances is a housekeeper. Patrick was born in Hull, David in Carlisle, and Frances in Manchester. Patrick is also a widower, while neither David nor Frances are married. In the 1871 census, Patrick is aged 62 and again living in 45 Bridge Street with his son Daniel, 22, his granddaughter Frances B., who's 8, and Margaret Barber, who's a servant. It's likely that David and Daniel are the same person, while Patrick, Daniel and Frances are a warper, a clerk and a scholar respectively. As in the 1881 census, Patrick was born in Hull, Daniel in Carlisle and Frances in Manchester. In the 1861 census, Patrick is 52 years old, living in 21 Bridge Street with his wife Elizabeth, who's aged 55, and with sons Thomas, William and Daniel. Patrick is a cotton piece tooler, while Thomas and William are both cotton warpers. Patrick is recorded as being born in Hull, Elizabeth in Orton in Cumberland, and all 3 sons in Carlisle. Neither Thomas nor William are married. In the 1851 census, Patrick is 41 years old, living at 21 Bridge Street with his wife Elizabeth, who's 44, and they have 5 sons: Robert, who's 21, John, who's 19, Thomas, who's 16, William, who is 8, and Daniel, who is 3. Patrick is a cotton warper, born in Hull. Elizabeth was born in Orton, Cumberland, while all the sons were born in Carlisle. Meanwhile, Robert is a tailor, John a saddler and harness maker, and Thomas a cotton hand loom weaver. None of the sons are married, and it should be noted that this family are recorded over 2 pages of the census. Finally, in the 1841 census, we find Patrick, aged 30, living on Church Street, Carlisle. Also there is Margaret, aged 30, Robert 12, John 9, Thomas 6 and Anne 1, and Patrick is a warper, and everyone other than Patrick was born in Cumberland. Given that all the other information ties in with the other census details, there is a question of who Margaret is. Is this a mistake for Elizabeth? And when did Patrick and Elizabeth marry? We can now look for a possible record of a marriage of Patrick McMurray to an Elizabeth. Robert is 12 years old in 1842, so they must have been married before 1830 or 1829. So a search of the Find My Past online resources reveals a parish record of St Mary's, Carlisle, where a Patrick McMurray, note there's a space there, and an Elizabeth Armstrong were married on the 6th of September 1828. It would seem that Margaret in the 1841 census is a mistake. As to birth records, a search on the Find My Past website reveals that Patrick McMurray was baptised by John and Margaret McMurray in St Mary's, Hull, on the 25th of April 1808. This enables us to find Thomas McMurray, born on the 16th of August 1812 and baptised on the 29th of September 1812 by John and Margaret McMurray in Sculcoats, which is near Hull. In 1808 John is a soldier, but in 1812 he's recorded as a weaver. This enables us to find John, aged 60, and Margaret, aged 63, in the 1841 census, living in Bridge Street with Thomas, although John is now a carter, who is someone who drove a light two-wheeled carriage. Meanwhile, Thomas is a weaver. But there would appear to be a discrepancy with his age. It should be closer to 29 rather than 25. However, we are still missing anything that might tell us when Thomas McMurray married Jane, and consequently what Jane's surname might be. Interestingly, Elizabeth, the wife of Patrick, was an Armstrong, and according to both the 1851 and 1861 censuses, she was born in Orton, Cumberland, around about 1805 or 1807. A search of parish records reveals that there are two possible candidates in the parish of St Giles in Great Orton, a village to the west of Carlisle. The first Elizabeth was baptised on the 27th of January 1805 to John Armstrong and his wife Anne Hewitson. The second Elizabeth was baptised on the 23rd of April 1806 to James Armstrong and his wife Anne Knight. James Armstrong and Anne Knight did not have any other children, at least not baptised at Great Orton, but John Armstrong and Anne Hewitson had 5 other children: Joseph in 1800, Mary in 1802, Anne in 1808 and John in 1810. But sadly we are again drawing a blank. So we need to examine the relationship another way to see if we can come to a conclusion about the surname of Jane. From the 1861 and 1871 censuses, we can say that Jane McMurray is the aunt of Margaret Moffett and Jane Hullen. We have determined that Hugh Houlihan and Mary Armstrong are the parents of Margaret and Jane Hullen, or rather Houlihan. Therefore, Jane McMurray is the sister of either Hugh Houlihan or Margaret Armstrong. Now we know from the census information that Jane McMurray was born in Carlisle around 1810. And we concluded in Video 10 that Hugh Houlihan was born in Ireland around 1806. We also know that Mary Armstrong was born in Carlisle around 1808. Therefore, it's more likely that Jane is the sister of Mary, and so should be called Jane Armstrong. We can now ask 2 questions. Who were Mary's parents, and did they also have a daughter called Jane? So we now redirect our focus on to the parish registers for Carlisle at the beginning of the 19th century. According to the Find My Past online resources, there are 5 Mary Armstrongs baptised in St Mary's, Carlisle between 1806 and 1809, and in each case we have the parents' names, so that on the 4th of May 1806 Mary Armstrong was baptised to Michael Armstrong and Mary Redham. On the 11th of May 1807 there's Walter Armstrong and Anne Bullman. 25th of December 1807, James Armstrong and Jane Scott. 24th of January 1809 to Matthew Armstrong and Jane Cowan. And finally on the 9th of February 1809 to John Armstrong and Elizabeth Bell. According to the Find My Past online resources, there are 6 Jane Armstrongs baptised at St Mary's, Carlisle between 1810 and 1812, and in each case we have the parents' names, but there is only one couple who have a daughter baptised at the right time: James Armstrong and Jane Scott, who baptised their daughter Jane on the 14th of April 1810. Therefore, it's possible to suggest that Jane McMurray and Mary Houlihan are the daughters of James Armstrong and Jane Scott. When we look for other children born to James Armstrong and Jane Scott in Carlisle, we are able to locate two boys, Thomas baptised on the 8th of January 1804 and Joseph baptised on the 13th of October 1805. A further search reveals that a James Armstrong and a June Scott, as that's how it's transcribed, were married on the 24th of February 1803 in the parish of Addingham, which is about 20 miles to the south east of Carlisle. Without an original image of the register, it's not possible to see if that June should really be Jane. Consequently, the suggestion is that sometime in the 1840s, Thomas McMurray married, or at least decided to live with, Jane Armstrong, the younger sister of Mary Armstrong, who had married Hugh Houlihan in 1828. If this is the case, we can now draw a McMurray family tree. However, this is really just an educated guess, and we are still missing a document that would confirm this one way or another. But the search continues. Meanwhile, this is the last in the series of videos for the moment. There is still much to be unravelled about Moffett Ancestry, so more videos will be produced eventually.